welcome to our deep dive, you guys, into human behavior.
Oh, fascinating stuff.
Super fascinating. We're going to be trying to learn how to decipher all these little nonverbal clues that we give each other.
Like a secret language?
Exactly, a secret language. And we're going to be using the book that you guys chose, How to Analyze People with Dark Psychology. I'm very excited about this.
Me too.
This should be really fun.
Yeah, it's I think this is a really useful skill for anybody,
Yeah, absolutely.
and everyday life.
For sure.
Just for, understanding the folks around you.
Right. And, we think so much about the spoken word and how important that is. But,
Yeah.
So much of it really is nonverbal.
Yeah, the book actually emphasizes that quite a bit, that it's,
Yeah.
so much of communication is not what you say.
Right.
It's all this other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're going to equip you with the tools you'll be able to spot all this stuff. So
Hopefully. We'll see how we do.
we'll see how we do. Well, so let's just jump into it then. Behavior analysis. What is that?
So it's really just the science of, understanding and predicting human actions. So it's about looking at people's behavior and trying to figure out what's going on inside,
Oh, right.
what their motivations are.
Gotcha.
And it can be really, really useful, in all sorts of situations. Like, let's say you're in a negotiation.
Right.
Or you're trying to build a relationship with someone. If you can understand their behavior, you can really get ahead of the game.
Right. So you're saying that, like, if you understand their baseline of how they usually act, then you can spot when
Exactly.
things are different.
Not a poker player,
Right. Yeah.
You want to know what their tell is.
Okay.
So you can know when they're bluffing.
Okay.
So with behavior analysis, you're basically trying to figure out what people's tells are in everyday life.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, now let's get to some specifics then. What are some specifics of body language that are important to pay attention to?
Right. So one of the things that the book talks about is dilated pupils.
Okay. Yeah.
So when people's pupils get bigger, it can be a sign of, attraction or interest or excitement.
Oh.
It's like their body is saying, hey, I'm really into this.
Oh, so their body is, okay, so it's involuntary. It's not something they're controlling.
Right. Yeah. Most of the stuff is
Gotcha. Okay.
subconscious.
Okay, so dilated pupils, that's something to look for. What else?
Excessive blinking.
Okay.
That can be a sign that someone's feeling stressed or anxious, or maybe even that they're trying to deceive you.
Oh, wow.
So, like, if you ask someone a question and they start blinking a lot, it could be a sign that they're not being entirely truthful.
Okay. Interesting. What about gaze direction? Looking to the left or the right.
Yeah.
Does that mean anything?
That's one that's a little bit more controversial. There are some people who say that looking to the left means you're recalling a real memory, and looking to the right means you're making something up.
Really?
But the research is actually kind of mixed on that.
Okay.
So it's not a foolproof method,
Yeah.
but it's something to be aware of.
Okay.
I think more importantly, it's about looking for changes in gaze direction. So if someone's usually making eye contact with you, and then suddenly they start looking away when you ask them a specific question,
Right.
that could be a red flag.
Okay, gotcha. So it's more about a change than the direction itself.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. What about those, those tiny little facial expressions?
Oh, the micro expressions.
Yeah, those little micro expressions. Do those mean anything?
Yeah, those are super interesting.
Oh.
They're like these really brief, involuntary facial movements that can reveal someone's true emotions, even if they're trying to hide them.
Wow.
So, like, if someone says they're happy, but you see a flash of sadness in their eyes, something else is going on.
Wow.
And there's actually a whole system for coding these expressions called FACS. It stands for Facial Action Coding System.
Wow.
But it's pretty complicated. It takes a lot of training to learn.
Okay.
But I think even just being aware that these micro expressions exist can be really helpful.
Right.
Because it can make you more attuned to the subtle ways that people are communicating with you.
Okay, so we've talked about the face. What about, like, hand gestures?
Right, yeah. Hand gestures, those are another big one.
Yeah.
Like, the way someone holds their hands can tell you a lot about how they're feeling. Like, if someone's got their arms crossed,
Right.
it's probably a sign that they're feeling defensive or closed off.
Right, yeah.
And if they're fidgeting with their hands, it could be a sign that they're nervous or anxious.
What about, like, like if they're holding a cup of coffee?
Oh, yeah, that too.
If they're clutching it, really tight, does that mean anything?
It could. It could be a sign of insecurity, like they're trying to create a barrier between themselves and the world.
Oh, Interesting.
Yeah, it's like a self-soothing behavior.
Gotcha.
They're trying to make themselves feel more comfortable.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much our bodies kind of betray us without us even knowing.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's like our bodies have a mind of their own sometimes.
Okay, so we've talked about facial expressions, hand gestures, gaze direction.
Mm.
What about insecurity?
Yeah.
How does that manifest in our body language?
Right. So insecurity is a tricky one because it can manifest in so many different ways.
Right.
Sometimes it can be really obvious, like someone who's constantly putting themselves down
Right.
or always seeking reassurance from others.
Yeah.
But sometimes it can be more subtle, like someone who boasts a lot about their achievements.
Really?
Or someone who's always trying to one-up other people.
Huh.
It's almost like they're overcompensating for something.
So you're saying even someone bragging could be a sign of insecurity.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to convince themselves, as much as anyone else, that they're good enough.
Interesting. Wow, I've never thought about it that way before.
It's a fascinating thing.
So really what you're saying is that when we're trying to figure out if someone is insecure or not, we have to go beyond just looking at their behavior and really try to understand what's motivating them.
Absolutely. I mean, behavior is just a symptom, right?
Sure, yeah.
It's the outward expression of what's going on inside.
Right.
So if you want to truly understand someone, you have to dig a little deeper.
So it's not about judging them. It's about
Ultimately,
just trying to see what might be driving those behaviors.
it's about empathy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So insecurity can be really complex.
Yeah.
It can lead to all sorts of contradictory behaviors.
Absolutely.
Like one minute someone might be clinging to you for dear life, and then the next minute they're pushing you away.
Yeah, they're afraid of intimacy.
Oh, wow.
But at the same time, they crave it. So it's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it can make it really challenging for the people around them.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you can understand where they're coming from, it can make it a lot easier to deal with.
Yeah. And speaking of challenges, let's move on to a really challenging topic, which is romantic interest.
Uh-oh.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to know, are they into me?
Yeah. Everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
So how can we use body language to figure that out?
Okay. So there are some classic signs of romantic interest.
Okay.
Like prolonged eye contact.
Okay.
If someone's holding your gaze for longer than usual, that could be a sign that they're interested.
Okay.
And also playful touches.
Okay.
Like if they brush your arm or touch your shoulder,
Right.
that could be a way of flirting.
Okay.
And then there's mirroring behavior.
Mirroring.
Yeah, that's when someone subconsciously copies your body language.
Oh, like if I lean in and they lean in too.
Exactly. It's a sign that they're trying to build rapport with you.
Okay.
And it can be a really powerful sign of attraction.
Wow. Okay. And what about like jealousy? If they see you talking to someone else and they get all weird about it.
Well, jealousy can definitely be a sign of romantic interest,
Okay.
but it's also a sign of insecurity.
Right.
So you have to be careful about how you interpret it.
Right. So just because someone's jealous doesn't necessarily mean they're in love with you.
Exactly.
Okay. So, we've been talking a lot about observing other people's body language.
Right.
But what about our own? Are there certain personality types that tend to have certain body language patterns?
Yeah, definitely. The book actually talks about this quite a bit.
Oh,
Like introverts tend to be more reserved in their body language.
okay.
They might not make as much eye contact. They might keep their arms crossed more often.
Okay.
Extroverts, on the other hand, are usually more expressive.
Okay.
They make more eye contact. Right.
They use more hand gestures.
Okay, so there are some general patterns.
Yeah. And you can even break it down further into the four main personality dimensions. Sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling.
Oh, the Myers-Briggs stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, for example, people who are more sensing tend to be more grounded in their body language.
Wow, okay.
They might stand with their feet firmly planted on the ground.
Gotcha.
People who are more intuitive might be more flighty, or they might move around more.
Okay, so there's a lot to look at. What about mind control?
Oh boy, here we go.
I know, right?
Yeah.
That sounds a little scary, but I think it's also, really intriguing. So let's talk about it.
Okay, so mind control is basically any technique that's used to influence someone's thoughts, feelings, or behavior without their consent.
Wow.
And it can be used for all sorts of purposes, both good and bad.
Oh, okay.
So like on the one hand, you have things like brainwashing and hypnosis, which can be used to control people against their will.
But on the other hand, you have things like persuasion and influence, which can be used to motivate people or to get them to see things from your perspective.
So it's all about how it's used.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like with any tool, it can be used for good or for evil.
Well, let's start with the bad. Let's
Yeah.
talk about brainwashing. I think a lot of us have this kind of Hollywood image in our minds of, someone being strapped to a chair with a swirling hypnotic device.
Right, yeah, the Manchurian candidate.
Yeah, exactly. So how accurate is that?
Not very. I mean, brainwashing is a real thing, but it's usually a lot more subtle and insidious than that.
Okay.
It usually involves a gradual process of breaking down someone's identity and then rebuilding it in a way that suits the brainwasher's needs.
Wow.
And it often involves things like isolation, sleep deprivation, and psychological torture.
So it's like really heavy stuff.
Yeah, it's really scary stuff.
Okay, what about hypnosis? Is that like the stage shows where people, cluck like a chicken?
Well, stage hypnosis is kind of a different beast. Okay.
It's mostly for entertainment. But therapeutic hypnosis is a real thing.
Okay.
And it can be really effective for treating things like anxiety, phobias, and even chronic pain.
So how does that work? I mean, how can someone just put you in a trance and make you do things you don't want to do?
Well, they can't really.
Okay.
Hypnosis is really about suggestion.
Okay.
It's about putting someone into a relaxed state where they're more open to suggestion.
Okay.
But the hypnotist can't make you do anything you don't want to do.
Okay, so you're always in control.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's more like guided meditation than mind control.
Gotcha. Okay, so we've talked about brainwashing and hypnosis. What about manipulation?
Manipulation is a little bit trickier to define because it can take so many different forms.
Okay.
But essentially, it's any attempt to influence someone for your own benefit without regard for their well-being.
So it's like you're using them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it can be really subtle.
Okay.
Like a manipulator might use guilt trips or playing the victim. Right?
Or even flattery to get what they want.
So it's not always like this evil mastermind like twirling their mustache.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Most manipulators are actually really charming and charismatic.
Wow.
That's how they get away with it.
So how do we protect ourselves from that?
Well, the first step is awareness.
Okay.
Once you know what to look for, it's a lot easier to spot manipulation when it's happening.
Right.
And then you have to set boundaries.
Okay.
Don't let people walk all over you.
Gotcha.
And don't be afraid to say no.
Good advice. Okay, and then finally, let's talk about persuasion.
Okay.
This seems like it's everywhere these days.
Yeah, it is.
From advertising to politics to, just trying to convince your friends to watch your favorite show.
Yeah, persuasion is everywhere.
So how is persuasion different from manipulation?
Well, I think the key difference is intent.
Okay.
With persuasion, you're trying to convince someone to do something that you believe is in their best interest. But with manipulation, you're trying to get them to do something that's in your best interest, even if it's not in theirs.
Okay, so it's kind of like a gray area.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to be aware of the distinction.
Yeah.
Because persuasion can be a really powerful tool for good.
Right.
Like, think about all the social movements that have been driven by persuasion.
Yeah.
The civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement.
Mm-hmm.
Those were all about persuading people to change their minds and to do what's right.
Okay, so persuasion can be used for good or for evil.
Absolutely.
Just like most of these techniques.
Just like anything else, it all depends on how it's used.
Right. Well, this is a lot to take in.
It is, isn't it?
And I think, one of the things that I'm taking away from this is that, we all have the potential to be both manipulators and persuadees.
Yeah, I think that's true.
We all have our own agendas.
Mhm.
We all have our own needs. And we all use these techniques to get what we want, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, it's all part of human nature.
Right. So it's really about becoming aware of these techniques
Yeah.
and using them ethically and responsibly.
Exactly.
Okay, well, this has been really fascinating.
It has, hasn't it?
Yeah, but, this is a deep dive. We're only scratching the surface here.
Yeah, there's so much more to learn. So in the next part, let's dig into some more specifics about body language.
Okay.
Let's talk about things like posture, leg movements, and handshakes.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into analyzing people.
Okay, so you want to dive into some more specific body language cues?
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty, like posture.
Okay, posture. So good posture. Standing up straight, shoulders back. It can convey confidence, you know, trustworthiness, makes you look more, I don't know, powerful.
Yeah, it makes sense. Slouching just makes you look kind of, I don't know, defeated.
Right, exactly, like you've already given up. Yeah. So what about leg movements? You mentioned that before.
Oh, yeah, leg movements. Those can be really interesting because they're often like totally subconscious. People don't even realize they're doing it.
Yeah.
So, for example, if someone's feet are pointed towards the door
Okay.
while they're talking to you, it
Mm-hmm.
could be a sign that they're like not really engaged in the conversation
Oh, really?
and they're just, waiting for a chance to escape.
Interesting. So it's like their body's already halfway out the door.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
What else? What else about legs?
Crossed legs.
Okay.
That can often be a sign of defensiveness or, maybe they're feeling a little bit uncomfortable.
Okay.
And then on the other hand, if someone's sitting with their legs spread wide apart,
Mm-hmm.
that can be a sign of dominance, especially for men.
Okay.
It's like they're trying to take up as much space as possible.
So it's all about like, you know, claiming territory.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
It's like a nonverbal way of saying, I'm in charge here.
Wow, okay. It's amazing how much we communicate without even realizing it.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of creepy,
Yeah, a
actually,
little bit.
but also really fascinating.
Yeah.
So handshakes, right? That's got to be a big one.
Oh, yeah, handshakes.
Yeah.
Super important.
Yeah. What do we need to know?
Okay, so a firm handshake, that's generally seen as a sign of confidence and trustworthiness. You don't want to give someone a limp, dead fish handshake,
Right. Yeah.
but you also don't want to go overboard, like crushing someone's hand.
Right.
That can be a sign of aggression or, maybe they're trying to overcompensate for something.
Okay. So it's like all about finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. Firm, but not too firm.
Okay. So, we've been talking a lot about like interpreting other people's body language, but what about our own?
Right, that's a good point. I mean, it's just as important to be aware of the signals that we're sending out.
Right. Yeah.
Like, if you're going into a job interview, you want to make sure you're projecting confidence. So, stand up straight, make eye contact, smile. Those are all really important nonverbal cues.
So it's almost like we can use this knowledge to kind of, I don't know, hack the system a little bit.
Yeah, no way.
Like if we know what signals to send, we can kind of influence how people perceive us.
Exactly. And that can be really helpful in all sorts of situations, like
Mhm.
not just job interviews, but also, first dates, networking events, presentations, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like having, I don't know, like a secret weapon.
Yeah, kind of is.
So what are some other like practical tips that we can use to, improve our own body language?
Well, one thing is to be aware of your posture. Like we talked about before, good posture can make a big difference.
Right.
And then make eye contact.
Yeah.
But don't stare people down,
Right.
Just make sure you're making eye contact for a few seconds at a time.
Okay.
And then smile.
Yeah.
Smiling makes you look more approachable, more likable.
So it's like disarming, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You smile at someone, they can't help but smile back.
Usually. Unless they're having a really bad day.
Right. Yeah. Well, so, we've talked about body language in general and then some specific cues. So I think now's a good time to, sort of bring it all together.
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
what are some like key takeaways that we can, use in our everyday lives?
Okay. So I think the first takeaway is that body language is incredibly important. It's a huge part of how we communicate.
Yeah.
And it's often more honest than our words.
Right. So we got to pay attention to it.
Exactly.
Okay. What else?
The second takeaway is that body language can be really subtle.
Yeah. Okay.
So you have to pay attention to the little things.
Right. Like all these tiny little cues that we've been talking about.
Exactly. The raised eyebrow, the
Mhm.
fleeting smile.
Yeah.
All those little things can tell you a lot.
But what else? What else?
The third takeaway is that body language is contextual.
Okay.
So you have to take into account the situation, the person's culture, all those things.
So it's not just about like memorizing a list of cues. It's about kind of understanding the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Right. So it's complex.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot to take in. But I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah, me too. So I think the book's overall message, is that we all have the power to be more aware of our own body language and to read other people's body language.
Absolutely.
And that can help us communicate more effectively, build stronger relationships,
Mm.
avoid manipulation. It's like a superpower.
It kind of is.
Okay, so, obviously we can't cover everything in one deep dive.
Right.
So in part 3, I want to talk about some of the ethical considerations around this stuff.
Okay, yeah. That's hard.
Like, if we know how to read people's body language, how do we use that knowledge responsibly?
Mm-hmm. Good question.
So stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive into analyzing people. Okay, so we've talked about all these different techniques for analyzing people, but, there's a bit of a dark side to all this, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like anything else. It can be used for good or for evil.
Exactly. So how do we make sure that we're using this knowledge responsibly? That we're not crossing any ethical lines.
Right. Well, I think the first thing is to remember that just because you can read someone's body language doesn't mean you know everything about them.
Right. Yeah, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And it's important to not make assumptions about people based on just their body language. You have to take into account all the other information you have about them, too.
Right. Like their words, their actions, their history.
Exactly. And, even then, it's still just an interpretation. It's not like you can read minds.
Right, yeah. Yeah, you're not a Jedi.
No, sadly.
So what else? What are some other things we need to keep in mind?
Well, I think it's important to be respectful of people's privacy. You know, just because you can tell that someone's feeling anxious or insecure doesn't mean you have the right to call them out on it.
Right. Yeah. You don't
Yeah.
want to make them feel uncomfortable or embarrassed.
Exactly. It's about using this knowledge to understand people better, not to judge them or manipulate them.
Okay. So it's all about empathy and compassion.
Absolutely. And, it's also about being aware of your own biases. We all have biases, whether we realize it or not, and those biases can definitely affect how we interpret other people's body language.
So it's important to be aware of our own stuff before we start trying to analyze other people.
Exactly. It's like the saying goes, you can't see the forest for the trees. If you're too focused on your own biases, you're not going to be able to see the other person clearly.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So really it all comes down to this. Analyzing people isn't about becoming some sort of master manipulator. It's about understanding human behavior and using that knowledge to build better relationships.
Absolutely. It's about connection, not control.
Yeah. And what's really cool is that the more you learn about this stuff, the more you start to see it everywhere.
Yeah.
You start to notice all these little things that you never paid attention to before.
Yeah. It's like you've suddenly been given a new pair of glasses.
Exactly. You're seeing the world in a whole new way.
And it can be really eye-opening.
It is. It really is. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. It's been a lot of fun.
It has. So, for our listeners out there, if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, definitely check out the book, How to Analyze People with Dark Psychology. It's full of really fascinating insights.
Yeah. And just remember, be ethical, be responsible, and don't be creepy.
Good advice. And on that note, that concludes our deep dive into analyzing people. Till next time, stay curious.
And keep observing.
All right, you guys, here's the 10-point summary from this deep dive. Body language makes up over 60% of how we communicate. Crazy, right?
It is wild.
Yeah, really going to pay attention to it. Okay, number 2, those dilated pupils, blinking a lot and looking away, all those things can reveal a lot about what someone's really thinking and feeling.
Yeah, those micro expressions really spill the beans.
Number 3, figuring out someone's normal behavior first is key to spotting when they're acting differently.
Like establishing that baseline, right?
Exactly. Number 4, those super quick facial expressions, the micro expressions, they can give away hidden emotions, even if someone's trying to hide them.
Yeah, they happen so fast, though.
Number 5, those barrier signals, like crossing your arms or holding something tight, those usually mean someone's feeling uncomfortable or anxious.
Totally. Like they're putting up a wall.
Okay. Number 6, insecurity shows up in different ways, from putting others down to bragging a lot.
Yeah, it's all about compensating for those feelings of not being good enough.
Number 7, jealousy could mean romantic interest, but it also points to insecurity. So watch for other signs too.
Don't jump to conclusions.
Exactly. Number 8, understanding someone's personality type, whether they're an introvert or extrovert, a thinker or a feeler, helps you understand how they might act in relationships.
Personality is such a fascinating piece of the puzzle.
Number 9, mind control techniques like brainwashing and persuasion, those can be used for good or bad. We got to be aware of how they work.
Awareness is key to protecting yourself.
And number 10, emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and manage your own emotions and those of others. That's crucial for navigating social situations and building healthy relationships.
Totally. It's the key to avoiding manipulation and building strong connections.
And there you have it, 10 takeaway points from our deep dive into analyzing people.
I hope you guys enjoyed it.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating deep dive.